You think about how much of our so-called personal and confidential information is actually accessible in so many places and by so many different people and organizations. You need to learn what's being done with this information and how to keep yourself secure. Welcome to My Connected Life with Tyler Cohen Wood. When you're in control of your data in cyberspace, you feel all the more secure. Now, here's your host, Tyler Cohen Wood.
Today, we're going to talk about our top 2 predictions for 2022. And I am so excited and happy to have 2 wonderful guests. I'd like to introduce James Aliban, Senior Security Strategist for VMware. Hi, James. Welcome.
Hi, Tyler. Thank you for having me today.
So happy to have you here. And Karen Worstell, also Senior Cybersecurity Strategist at VMware. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, Tyler. We're just so excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Well, thanks for being here. So, we've had a really tough couple of years, and there's so many predictions that we have for 2022, but we're going to talk about 2 that we think are really important. The first is kind of obvious seeming. We're going to start seeing more strategic attacks that have a greater impact than attacks we've had before. And that's going to include more attacks on critical infrastructure. So what do you guys think about that prediction? I mean, we've just recently had, we've had SolarWinds, we've had Log4, and these are absolutely critical attacks. Vulnerabilities opening for an attack.
Yeah, and I think it's a great start, Tyler, in that sense. And I think 2021 has just set us up for the future in the sense of copycat attacks that are continuing to happen. And we just, it's just the start in sense of the painting, the writing on the wall in that sense. SolarWinds kicked it off and we kind of all went, oh, wow, what a major attack that we have in front of us. And then Colonial Pipeline happened, and then the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, and you just continue to kind of build this tandem effect, ransomware of a service that happened as well. And from that point of view, for me, and to kind of kick this off, and Karen, feel free to jump in after this, is copycat cyber attacks on critical industries will just continue to disrupt human lives long into 2022. And we saw the start with Colonial Pipeline just this year.
Yeah, Tyler, we're in December now of 2021, and I have to say that I think most of us got smacked in the face this weekend with the reality that we live in a 0-day world. Yeah. And we have to now expect that is now the turn. The tide is turned in that we're going to see those over and over and over again. We had more 0 days in the first half of 2021 than we had in the whole prior 5 years combined. So that's now the new norm. And looking at the nature of the attack, I think we have some pretty interesting prognostications about the role of open source and about how we use open source, and whether we need to make some adjustments in the way that we approach using these code bases, and without having an adequate threat modeling process in place to allow us to use it. I mean, we're looking at, in a cloud first world, we're looking at software defined infrastructure everywhere. And the quote I saw this morning as I opened up my email was that the Log4j code base is implemented so widely, it's as ubiquitous as salt. And if you think about that, the potential for the first wave of the attack to be, okay, I see this 0 day that's going to come out there and show that we've got this vulnerability everywhere. The very next thing that follows on its heels is a worm. And now we have a whole new level of persistent problem. So yeah, we have the world changed this month
It,
in a significant way.
It did. And for those of you who aren't familiar with some of the terms we used, 0-day code is hacking code. You can think of it like malware that no one has seen yet. So it's brand new, and that's why it attacks so quickly, and that's why it can be as serious as it is. And why don't we kind of delve into the log4j attack a little bit? Because what you said, Karen, you're 100% right. This is very scary because this is open source code that pretty much everyone has and is using. And this exploit makes it so easy that I suspect my miniature schnauzer could probably attack somebody using this code.
Right. It doesn't even take authentication to do the attack. Something as simple as changing the name of your iPhone on Apple could trigger this vulnerability. And so, yes, it's like it's triggering in Minecraft. It's like kind of a whole new level of exposure, because it's trivial for this to get started. Yeah.
And let's just remember as well, and I think it's important to add that let's just remember that, nearly 2 years ago, the pandemic created the perfect storm.
Yes.
And the perfect storm was that, we all are working from home, and organizations, this pattern of events is not something that's just happened by chance necessarily. It's creating that perfect storm where vulnerabilities, 0 days, malware, cyber criminals are opportunists. We say this every single time. Cyber criminals are opportunists. And what the perfect storm created was that people working from home and organizations just weren't set up to protect organizations in this landscape.
Because it was immediate. It was one day you're going to work, the next day you're working from home, and it's just like sudden.
Exactly. And when you build your security fences, like the way I always try to articulate it is, it's like having a bubble wrapped around your office. Like you have your office, you wrap a bubble around it, bubble wrap, whatever you want to call it, and you protect it. And you're protecting from the inside out. You're protecting everything that tries to get in. And all of a sudden, overnight, that somebody put a pin in that bubble and burst it. Because now everybody, that bubble is so much bigger. And, from that point of view is, organizations had to change their strategy, change their tactics, and try to invest somehow overnight in security, which in reality, we didn't know any organizations. I have a lot of empathy in that perspective, that any organization just didn't know how to protect however X amount of users, whether it be 100, 1,000 or whatever it might be, in such remote locations overnight. And then, from that, dwell time just became such a big characteristic of the pandemic for me, because, we saw it wasn't that attacks were happening overnight and within seconds, an organization would be attacked and we would see the effect of that attack. You would see organizations being attacked and didn't know about that attack for months, if not years from time. And Tyler, you mentioned it earlier with SolarWinds, when it's very likely that 6 to 7 months beforehand, that attack actually took shape. And the dwell time, and we're giving attackers opportunity to ultimately learn about our organizations learn about our organization and our infrastructure behind our back. And we don't know about it.
Yeah, it's a pretty, I just picked up a book over the weekend, and it was called They Tell Me This Is How the World Ends. I highly recommend it. But
wow.
It starts with setting the stage of what happened back in 2016 in Ukraine, when we had a massive cyber attack that affected the entire.
It broke down the power grid.
Yeah, no picture.
Right. And so, but what led up to that was the leakage of all of the hacking tools and intelligence about the holes that exist in our infrastructure,
right,
by the NSA. And so when we have essentially all of the intelligence about how to break into things with 0-day efficiency already out there in the wild, right? Essentially, and in the hands of potential adversaries, then I think what we have to do is say, all right, you have to assume now that whatever exposures that might be out there, that there is a way to expose them, and it already exists. It just may not have hit you yet.
Right.
And as James pointed out, we increase the attack surface dramatically when we send us home to work. So yeah, so it's really, sorry about that. It's really a perfect storm, and our mindset has to change. And so from a prediction standpoint, right? My hope is the most positive prediction I could make on this is that we go, this is the world really made a major shift in 2020 and 2021. Mm-hmm. Now we see the extent of the damage that can occur in very rapid fashion, in a very widespread fashion, like you said, and could affect critical infrastructure very easily. So what do we have to do? Let's just pretend we could wind the clock back a little bit and say, what would it have taken for us to see this and to prevent the problem that we saw with Log4j? And what would we have done differently to make sure that we knew that? And I think one of those things would be that we have approached understanding everywhere when we use open source libraries, that somehow we know where they go. Like, it's one thing that it's ubiquitous as salt, but if I know where all the salt is, at least I have a head start, right? But
like you said, to tack on to your point, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but this was such a good point. The attack surface is so much greater, and it has been so much greater because you have your kids now. It's not so much anymore, but for 2020 and 2021, kids weren't home. It's doing school. That also broadens the attack vector. So, and there was another thing too that we really need to take into consideration here is people were terrified. People were absolutely terrified. And when you're terrified, you miss things. And we all know that hackers, oftentimes they rely on fear, urgency, and and human trust, and the desire, to help. And I think, that's just something that also, it's just a perfect storm of things that went wrong.
I think you bring up a great point there, Tyler, as well. I think, if we roll the clock back and say, well, hey, we weren't just asking security teams and people across the organization to say, oh, by the way, you're working from home, be more security aware. And the security teams, can you make sure that, you're checking log codes or scanning that wasn't just the question. It was also, make sure that you're avoiding a very unknown virus at that moment in time. And then you may have a family member that's in hospital or, whatever situation personally that you may in. I think you're absolutely spot on there. It wasn't the case of this was just a situation which meant that we was working from home and there wasn't anything else going on at that moment's time. But actually people's lives were 70, 80, 90% consumed by external influences, which created that fear and created that uncertainty in people's lives, or they potentially were unwell or ill, or whatever that may be. You may have had people, and we, Karen, you speak so elegantly to SOC burnout,
you really do.
But then when you speak, when we speak about SOC burnout as well, and we say, well, actually these under-resourced teams were more than likely more under-resourced because people are teaching their kids from home. People were unwell enough work. People were not necessarily 100% like head focused in the game because they had external influences as well. When you put all of these together, absolutely, like it could not have been more of the perfect storm presented to cyber criminals overnight. And And again, I mentioned it earlier, you know, I have a huge amount of empathy from that side. And I think, you know, if there's anything in 21 that we can move into 2022, it's actually learning from not necessarily mistakes, but learning from different areas to try to turn the tide and try to ensure that we can actually be ahead of the game. You know, really simple things, patching the environment where possible. If you can't patch, micro-segmentation is such an important part of just ensuring that we can actually mitigate. And when I say micro-segmentation, think about, you know, your home and thinking about just making sure that you have a fire door in each part of the house. So if the fire starts in my office, for example, I can ensure that that fire is not going to spread to other parts of the house. You think about that in a vulnerability terms or a malware piece of terms. It's stopping that malware traveling across the organization. You know, that's just really simple things that we can make sure that we've got in place. You know, you mentioned it earlier, Karen, about scanning the environment and the code base as well, making sure that you're just constantly fishing and looking for things in the organization. There's one thing I did want to add, which is also, I think, and I really like to add this in, is I think no matter who you are in an organization and where you work and what position you hold, go into that job and go in tomorrow with this mindset of, I have a responsibility for the organization I work for to be security aware. And I have a responsibility to question things. If I don't think something's right, I question it. I go and send an email to IT saying, I've received this email. I'm not sure what it is. Can you know, and just if we all have that mindset of going into work tomorrow, trying to be more security aware and just trying to have a stronger mindset to helping the organization, I think there's a lot of positive influences there as well that we can help organizations with.
There are so many great points there. So many great points, because yeah, it really was this perfect storm. And you know, having things like log4j, you know, that can affect everything. I think there also is a feeling of sort of being helpless, because in a way that's a situation that I don't have personal control over. And I think that that's sometimes hard. And I think that may be where the line between cybersecurity people like us, we're just paranoid by nature, and we're always looking for holes and what's going to go wrong, and everybody else. And cybersecurity is more of a nuisance, but it can't be that anymore. Every job role is going to have some level of cybersecurity experience coming into the role, because it's just too critical. You know, it's like both you, Karen, and James said, the attack surface is huge now, and you have to understand it. It's kind of as important as understanding, you know, learning in school, reading, math, you know, writing. This is just as important because it affects everything.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of effort to try to make everybody part of the cybersecurity team with varying degrees of effectiveness. You know, that's been something that we've talked about for years. The fact of it is that until we get this to a place where it's automated, and it's kind of just, we have automation and orchestration in a way that allows us to handle this very complex cybersecurity situation that we have now. We can put all of our best efforts on that and say all the right things. I agree with what James is saying, but practical experience tells me that human nature will not really pick up the baton and say, okay, we're all going to be, you know, primo cybersecurity aware now. And the fact of it is that the types of attacks that happen and the sequences that they follow in many cases, particularly when it's in a retail kind of a setting and everybody's shopping at home now, works 100% of the time with somebody.
Right.
Of course.
So that's why it continues to grow and becomes, you know, with the projection of, you know, a $5 trillion industry, you know, in the next couple of years. The reason for that is it works. And even even with all that we've said, this is why I think all that we've said, it's still really not picking up, even at the corporate level. And as a former CISO, I can remember the kind of conversations about needing to say, this is how we need to do something. This is how we need to take security seriously. And they're always feeling like there was this trade-off between speed of business, and doing things in a secure way. And I really think this coming year is where we must find the way to marry the speed of business with the essential underpinnings of doing so securely, because the consequences now are clearly way too dire if we don't do that.
Right. Because we are, once COVID hit and it was March 7th and everyone's at home now, we became, I would say 99.9% reliant on technology. And we've been relying on it for a really long time, but it became more important. And, in a way, I have to say that I'm absolutely ecstatic that our infrastructure was able to handle that, and that we could adapt to that so quickly and so flexibly. But I think now is the time. I think 2022 is going to be the year where the new norm is going to start to settle. And whatever that's going to be, I think that's really the year, because we've been through this. This is now 2 years. So I think we're starting to get better at some of these things. I mean, I will say one thing that I've seen this year that I just think is great, and in 2020, was kind of a collaborative, we're in this together, but innovation like we've never seen before. I mean, I think that there were some industries, especially the healthcare industry, where innovation just shot through the roof. And not all innovation is good, but a lot of innovation is really good. And I do think we're going to see more of that, new methods, new ways of doing things. And I do hope that cybersecurity is being taken more seriously. I think that it is, because I'm starting to see, at least at the government level, more things being done to help people with ransomware attacks. But I don't know. Like we said, I do think some of these attacks, again, are going to have a much bigger impact than they have before.
And I think on that, and it's a good point that I do think that the last nearly 2 years, let's say, but the last nearly 2 years has been such a collaborative effort, and we've certainly seen I look at it and go like, wow, like a pandemic could have genuinely hit at any time in the last 100 years, and it actually hit us in a part of our life. And a part of, it's like it actually hit at a time where we were actually able to work from home. And I'm not necessarily going to say we could do that fully securely, because we proved that we can't necessarily. We can, but it takes a maturity and it takes an adaptation to that. But, if we think about, had this have hit 15, 20 years ago, before the rise of the public cloud, before the rise of software as a service, could we have successfully gone and worked from home, and businesses to a certain extent been survived, full stop survived? Or would so many more organizations fall on their knees or gone out of business because 20 years ago we may not have been able to survive? And I don't believe we would have. So, from that point of view, I think we are in a position where we can go into this hybrid world and remote world where and successfully survive. And I do believe that. And I think, into kind of my prediction is, yeah, absolutely. In 2022, I think that the hybrid world will become the new, will become the normality. It won't just be a transitional period, and it won't just be a mitigation from that point of view. How often, do you could imagine now, like, the employee request will be, well, I want to choose where I want to, to work, and we should be able to have that. So I think that's an important consideration from that point of view as well.
I love your optimism, James.
I do too.
I have to be optimistic.
It's great. I'm excited now. I'm like, yes.
Okay, so here I'm going to be the big buzz.
Please.
It's precisely our interconnectedness that's going to cause the biggest problem. The interconnected nature of our ability to get work done, and the fact that our computers are essentially the bridge for us to everything we need to do, whether it's in our personal life or our work life or our smart home or our car or whatever that is. And having ubiquitous code embedded, I'm coming back to the wake-up call that just happened. Having ubiquitous code that is vulnerable, embedded everywhere, in such a way that it makes it very tough to remediate when we find out that it's subject to a 0-day, like we just found out this weekend. It means that the launch of an exploitation in a worm style fashion takes all of it out.
Right.
And so, I'm not trying to just be, Debbie Downer here, like happy holidays. And here's this is why cybersecurity people never go to parties.
We're turning into accountants overnight.
It's like
the funniest thing I've heard all day.
But I have to say that the urgency of this message getting heard, I can't emphasize enough. And that is, we have to switch. We have to flip the switch in terms of the ways that we handle the upstream threat management, threat modeling,
Absolutely.
and threat hunting.
Yeah.
We have to change our entire development cycle. Not to slow it down necessarily. So don't panic, people who my developer friends are like, there she goes again. But to go back and say, okay, we have to get together on this. We have to figure out. This is a given. The speed of development is now one of the most important things that we embrace in the new software development models. Okay, I'm totally supporting that. What I'm trying to say is we got to automate how we do this, and we've got to get the upstream threat hunting done properly in a way that helps us identify these holes in code, because this Log4j thing, it's been out there for a real long time. Nobody ever noticed that it had a problem before it was implemented everywhere. And so there's something broken, and we just need to go back and figure out very quickly what that is and start implementing a new way of doing things. Yes. And so I would like to hope that can be a prediction for 2022 and beyond, because we talk about zero trust. There's a lot of talk about zero trust. We have, I would say we need now zero trust for a 0-day world.
Yes.
And we've got to figure out how that affects our development cycle, because that's where this problem is manifesting.
And in that sense, I couldn't agree more, Karen. And I think, to a certain extent, our greatest lessons are taught by our biggest mistakes. And, from that point of view, this is exactly how I see the last 2 years. Like the exposure of our mistakes, and we're being honest here, the exposure of our mistakes have happened because the pandemic forced us to change.
Yes.
It's very comfortable when you don't have to change. As soon as you have to change, and you have to change your methodologies, change your working ways, and just expose yourself, that's when the mistakes and the cracks start to show. And for me, as long as we can learn by our mistakes, take a different approach, a zero trust world for the 0 days, I think is a beautiful way to really, drive that forward, and almost get back into the world of saying, well, hold up a minute, like if I don't know it, I'm not going to trust it. If I don't know that, I'm not going to trust it. And also I'd like to emphasize on that as well, but not only that, but also give security teams, and I'm talking to the board level here, like give security teams the resource, the tools, and the time to be able to protect your organization, protect your brand. That's another big lesson that I would like, and my prediction is that boards will start in some areas to do that, because we are starting to see the need. But, first and foremost, we've mentioned this a long time, but somebody such as a CISO, somebody reporting to the board who has that security knowledge is it's a necessity now for so many organizations, that you have to have that expertise at board level. And as a former CISO, Karen, I'm sure you'll 100% agree with me there. But the second point as well is also give them the time, the resource back to protect your brand. This isn't just a data problem. This isn't just a financial problem. This isn't just a people problem. This is a brand protection issue. And I have no doubt that many organizations don't want to be the next brand splashed across BBC or CNN or wherever it may be. And there's something that you can do about that. So, from that point of view, I think, again, driving into one of my predictions is that I do believe, and I'm being optimistic here, but I do believe that organizations will take the emphasis of, there is a desire, and we're certainly seeing a desire. There is a desire for organizations to take security more seriously, not security guys to be, security teams to be the people who sit in the corner at the party, who leave at 10 o'clock and, they're, oh, look at the security team again, and they're telling me what I'm doing wrong, but actually be part of that culture, be part of the business, and be actually accelerators to the business as well, and not seen as hindrance to organizations. I think that is a really positive thing that we can take out of the mistakes that have happened.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Even so, it could even help some larger organizations to have a liaison from every department with the cybersecurity team, or have the cybersecurity team have a liaison with every department, if that's something feasible.
Yeah, a lot of companies do that.
Fantastic.
There's the whole idea of a BCO or a BISO, that information security officer. It's just getting to be a really big job. My encouragement is that we look at the processes where we can go find the upstream choke point, not to slow things down, but to make sure that we've just dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. And that we also build automated tools to help us do that, so we can do it effectively and speedily. But yeah, I think we've been in a very, I don't know, maybe it's been a little bit of denial, and maybe it's just been a little wistful optimism that says, yeah, I can pick up this code from the code base. It's open source. People have got eyes on it. If there's anything wrong with it, we would find it by now.
Right.
And we now know that's not true. So let's we can just look for the opportunities, like James said, to make this our best lesson, and move forward from here.
Well, there has to be continuity too, because something that is secure today is not going to be secure tomorrow. And like take Log4j, that exploit, we didn't know about that, and that code's been around forever. So it has to be sort of a continuing process. Cybersecurity is not just, okay, we've done our pen testing, we're done. It's a living thing, a living, breathing thing that has to keep up with the enhanced technology. Yeah. But I do also agree that, more automation, more AI, more tools to really help offload a lot of the tasks that humans it's just impossible to do. A person can't correlate, every single thing that's going on. It has to be done working in conjunction with people.
It just burns people out. It just literally, and Karen, you can follow on nicely from here, but it just burns people out. And this is, it's such an emphasis of, okay, yes, you're paying fantastic people, but you've got to give them the tools and technology and resources to help, stopping the burnout, right? It's like asking a paramedic to work 24/7 for a week because you're under resourced, and then questioning why they're making mistakes on day 4 because they're just simply exhausted. And then we're questioning it, and it's like, well, hold up a minute. Again, it's and I'm sure, Karen, you'll follow on nicely from there.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, burnout, we already have an epidemic of burnout in the industry in cybersecurity. Our own research showed 51% of cybersecurity professionals were self-identifying as burned out. Another interesting study showed that executives who were dealing with a pandemic are 25% at the C level are self-medicating. So we have some real serious issues with trying to deal with everything that's been thrown our way for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So finding, being aware, like the suck it up buttercup philosophy doesn't work.
No.
And to just say, all right, what do we have to do differently? The world, we aren't going back to the world we were in pre-pandemic.
Never.
That Pandora's box is open. Whatever you want to say, the barn door is open. The cows are all gone. Now we need to say, all right, that's our new reality. Like, what are we going to do from here? So, another thing that we kind of chatted about very briefly when we were like talking before the show, Tyler, was a lot of people think they have a fallback strategy.
Yep.
How these things are going to come their way and they're going to, maybe smack them, but it's okay now. We have cyber insurance. We should probably talk about that because some things are changing there too.
Yes. It's in the whole cyber insurance field. It's very interesting to me because let's compare it to health insurance. Well, health insurance, most people are not sick. I happen to be one of those people. I have an autoimmune disease. So the insurance companies don't like me because I use a lot of the benefits and I always meet my deductible and they spend a lot on me, but I'm not the norm. So they're making money off all of the, healthy people paying the premiums, and they don't have a lot of me's. They have a lot more of healthy people than they do not healthy people. But cyber insurance, this is where I need to wrap my head around it.
Nobody's helping.
It's right. It's with cyber insurance. It's not a matter of if you're going to get hacked. It's a matter of when. So to me, it just seems like a business model that can't be sustained, because if everyone's making a claim, then how are you bringing in? So it's going to change. It's going to change significantly. It has to.
And the thing that baffles me the most is that kind of the first step is you ring your cyber insurance company, you tell them that you've been breached, and the first step is they'll bring in a negotiator. Why are they doing that? That negotiator is going to negotiate a lower ransom if they pay up straight away. Now, what are you saying? What are you giving the cyber criminals? You're saying, well, we're going to pay something. So no matter what happens, we're going to pay you something because you've been hit. And you think, and what we're saying there is cyber insurance is ultimately a get out clause, because you're paying X amount a month to get out of the breach and all of those mistakes that may have happened. And it almost, to a certain extent, doesn't matter who's at fault, which is the biggest thing for me, which I think is actually the worst thing about that. And again, if we can learn anything, then we can learn that cyber insurance is not a fallback. And also the model is unsustainable, because if you're ringing up your insurance company and not having to answer the critical questions, who's at fault, what happened, there's not really an investigation take place. Don't worry, James, what we'll do is we'll get the negotiator in place and we'll try to handle this ransom for you. To me, that's just kind of taking the emphasis of blame away. And to a certain extent, if we get breached, then there is blame in place, unfortunately, whether we like that fact or not.
Right.
And again, like you can't, I compare it to car insurance in that example, but car insurance, like you have a car accident and the first thing that happens is there is a collection of evidence. What happened? Where did it happen? Is it a typical black spot for a car accident? Who was at fault? If we can determine that, was there somebody pulling out on somebody, or did somebody hit into the back of somebody? They typically go and measure skid marks. If the skid marks are tried to determine the speed of the accident, and if somebody was speeding, we try to paint a picture of what happened. We try to, and car insurance, in that sense, are trying to paint a picture to ultimately make sure that, one, the right insurance company, because naturally there's two insurance companies or more that's involved, the right insurance company is paying out. And secondly, their insurance claim is valid, i.e., if they were doing 100 miles an hour in a 50, they may not be able to claim because they breached their insurance terms because they were speeding, which is what caused the accident. So, from that point of view, we should be able to replicate. And this isn't something that's new, is it really? Like, insurance is always been modeled in this way. Insurance has always been modeled in the way that we can calculate risk to what the terms of conditions of the contract is, to what the payment should be per annum or per month. That's not something that's new. So, from that point of view, cyber insurance should be really modeled in a very similar way, where, yes, if you've done everything possible to the terms and conditions of the contract, then yes, cyber insurance can have a healthy place in organizations. But I critically say healthy place, because right now I think cyber insurance creates a buffer and an unhealthy relationship with cyber attacks, essentially.
Because it's like a catch-all. It's like, well, at least we have
clause.
this and this will pay out, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's a get-out clause. Like, if I'm not saying this is what any of us would do, but from a point of view, as if we were driving a car and it didn't matter what speed we was going or how close we was to the back of the car, because that we'd have a brand new car if anything happened and there wasn't any risk around it necessarily, then ultimately we may not have the same driving habits. And so from that point of view, cyber insurance should not be a get-out clause. It has to be a risk mitigated, really last resort. We've done everything we possibly can, and then, but
it's actually, I don't know. So there's the one thing I would say is there's in the whole world of risk management, risk transference is an option. So it's not a stage of last resort. It's a stage of I am going to transfer this risk as opposed to mitigate it. And so that it's not like mitigate everything possible and then transfer the remainder all the time. So it's just not done like that. And so the thing that I think that really happened here recently at the end of November, when Lloyd's of London announced that they were putting exclusions for acts state-sponsored hacking attempts that could be considered acts of cyber war. And it leaves a ton of latitude for definition of cyber war. So let's go roll
Drive
back.
a truck through it.
Well, let's go roll back to I4J. Now that we know that this ubiquitous opening is all throughout our critical infrastructure, if some adversary launched a worm or worse that took vast swaths of our critical infrastructure offline, and we've got 8 days or so before this show airs, and so we'll see what happens in the next week. but that, let's just say that happens. Is that an act of cyber war? And does that exclude? Does the exclusion in the cybersecurity policies by the underwriters now make it so that you can't have coverage under those circumstances? It's almost like a version of force majeure for cybersecurity. So we are seeing for next year the tee up of a massive change in the insurance industry. Lloyd's is kind of the prow of the ship. And if they are starting to write these exclusions in it because the underwriters are basically saying there's too much risk out there now. And I don't know what this looks like post I4J, but prior to it, those exclusions were already being put in place. So companies really need to look at this. And I think to James's point, we'd love to see you do mitigation as opposed to risk transference as a primary strategy. But for those of you who are really thinking that risk transference becomes a great strategy, well, you may find yourself on the wrong end of an exclusion depending on the kind of attack that it hits us. So yeah, it's a whole bunch of changes coming that affect the cybersecurity landscape for 2022.
It's going to be interesting because I agree with you 100% that there's going to be more stringent things that you're going to have to go against. But, it's also going to be interesting too. We may see some court cases. How do you define active terrorism? It's some cases are going to be pretty darn obvious, but I think there could be some, like you said, with log4j, is it an act of terrorism? We don't know yet, but
we don't know.
Well, the definition. I think it would be really great to get a legal expert to talk about this, but
it would, and I'm not a legal expert, but I do watch Law and Order.
I a Holiday Inn Express last night. Yeah.
Well, I was going to bring up the good doctor analogy as we were speaking about this last week and saying that, and it was a really good, and I'm not a healthcare expert, but it was a Nora TV show producer. But the point is, the good doctor analogy was really interesting, and that risk mitigation to risk transfer, where you've got, the hospital got hit by a ransomware, and the first response from the CEO was, "Oh, we'll just call up the cyber insurance." And Leah, if anybody watches the show, will know that she's the IT guru or head of IT. I'm not actually sure. I don't think her title's ever been announced. But ultimately, she turned around and said, I will make sure that I reverse engineer this piece of malware. And they gave her a timeline and she did it, right? And the point is I think it was a really interesting and actually really a topical scene and topical episode, because not only we had a healthcare in the midst of the pandemic, a hospital under pressure anyway, but also then a hospital that had been hit by a ransomware attack. Oh, yeah. And you think about that is actually you think about it and you go, oh my God, what if that happened in real life? And then you go, oh wow, that has happened in real life. And you just kind of sit there going, wow, it's just crazy. And to exactly your point, Karen, is, if we think the mentality is just to risk mitigate, call the cyber insurance, everything's going to be okay, it's just not a reliable strategy, especially now we're starting to see, exclusions in place. And I think, for me, this can go two ways. We can either, and I think it will probably go the latter, but it may go the route of legal requirement to have cyber insurance, and that's the format, typically like a car insurance, for example, where it's just a legal requirement, or it's a choice, but it's maybe not worth the paper it's written on to a certain extent, because there are so many exclusions and so many different ways that the insurance company will look in different ways. And I'm being blunt in saying that, but I do think, you look at certain home emergency covers or certain insurance companies and then insurance covers, and then you get to the nitty gritty and you realize that maybe that wasn't covered or that wasn't covered. And maybe the investment is better spent elsewhere to, ensure that you're mitigating or at least trying to fight the fire in different elements. And that's probably, again, one area that I certainly would like to emphasize on is, you should really question yourself from a board level, and the CFO to the CISO to the CIO you should absolutely have that conversation. Is the cyber insurance a good investment for us, or can we better invest elsewhere in our organization? And that's a conversation that everybody should be having, and it's really important for us to all have that conversation.
Good point.
It's huge. That's absolutely huge. So I guess let's start summing up. So our prediction: cyber attacks will have greater impact, and we'll start seeing more of them. I believe that is going to be true. I believe we're seeing it. That even though the threat landscape has changed, has shifted to a work from home landscape, this is going to be interesting too, because it's not necessarily even a cyber issue. I've been reading a lot of studies and statistics. I think the last one I read was, and I should actually know this, was 30% of people asked will never return to an office. That's what they've said. So we're counting on people wanting to return to offices, and that's really not the case, because one of the things that we've actually done through this is we've kind of proven that it can work. And
we've enabled it. We've enabled it. We've allowed people to, we've changed people's contracts. We've allowed people to, the mass exodus to Silicon Valley to a certain extent, but like we've allowed this to happen. We've hired people on remote contracts, and we've expanded the talent pool, and we've done that purposely. And I think there's a ton of positives there. We've expanded the talent pool. We've enabled people to stay close to family, so stay close to places they want to live and spend their time and spend their life. Flexible working contracts, remote contracts, hybrid contracts. We've enabled this, and to a certain extent, like as you said earlier, Karen, there's just no going back. Like we can't just tell people, oh, by the way, you need to sell your house in Texas because we need you back in California, or whatever that may be. There's just no going back from that. And I don't think I kind of make the comment of, I think if organization, I don't think that will be a response from organizations. And I think if any organizations do make that approach, I think I don't think it'll positively impact them at all.
I agree. Karen, do you have anything to add to that? Because I really also loved your prediction that, risk transference for cyber insurance is just not acceptable. It's not. You have to know what's in the policy, and there are going to be more stringent things coming down.
Yeah, I would just clarify slightly that risk transference is still a legitimate strategy.
Right.
I don't know that it's necessarily in our new 0-day world going to be the strategy that works.
Whether it's reliable.
It may not be reliable, and it may be that, we've had so many conversations during the pandemic about social responsibility.
Yes.
So without landing on one side of that or another, this is very much like the whole vaccine question. Should I get fully protected as a cyber entity by doing the right mitigation? Or do I kind of hedge my bets and say, I'm going to take my vitamins, and if I get sick, I'll go to the doctor. I mean, that's kind of a risk transference idea in a loose way, and I'm not trying to make a judgment call on either one of them, but in the context of cyber security, when we now have ubiquitous risk that spreads like a virus, like a very contagious virus.
Yeah.
Right.
Mutating, constantly mutating.
Yeah.
Polymorph. It's a polymorphic virus. It's like malware.
Okay. So there, you could make an analogy, draw sort of an analogy there and say, do we have to switch from a risk transference as an acceptable best way to do some of covering our risk, or do we need to invest more in risk mitigation? So I don't want to go so far as to say risk transference is never a good idea, but because it always will be. The question is how much, what's the balance? And given the shift of the world that we're in today.
And I think to make it, relatable to everyone in that sense, Karen, because I think you bring up a really strong point there, is that when we think about the new variant, like we're in December and we think about the new variant, and there is so many unknowns again with the Omicron variant, that there is a certain element of risk transfer there from governments. We went from, only 2 months ago, the UK government said here that we could take a lateral flow test to enter the country because there was less risk, and I'm saying that with inverted commas, but because we knew that the vaccine, for example, was responding to the Delta variant to a certain extent, and et cetera, we've now shifted to, if you fly into the country, you have to take a PCR test and you have to stay at home until that result. That's, again, the transfer of risk and also the mitigation there, because we change. And this is, again, like the cybersecurity landscape is very similar. We're constantly having to adapt and flex and grow and mature and actually work with the unknown unknowns as well so often. And again, I mentioned it, possibly 40 minutes ago, like we all have a huge amount of empathy for the situation, because it is a constant shift and but you have to be flexible. You have to know that your strategy can change overnight, and you've got to be open to that. And you have to be willing to open and invest and change and flex over a period of time. Tyler, I'd like to add another kind of prediction that on the narrative that we spoke about as well, because we mentioned Colonial Pipeline, we mentioned what happened there as well, and I think that was probably just the start of attacks on critical infrastructure, and actually cyber criminals showing and demonstrating how easy it is to affect the human lives and affect our personal lives as well. And when we think about that, it's not just an attack on an organization, an attack on a brand, an attack for financial gain. It was really an attack to show the art of possible and to show what can be, what can be done. And I don't think that's the last one that we're going to see. So that's certainly my 2022 prediction, is we'll see more attacks on critical infrastructure, which will affect our daily lives more and more.
I believe that to be true too. Do you have one final prediction, Karen, as we start to close off?
I would say full employment for all cybersecurity professionals in 2022.
I am actually, that is, we have a couple minutes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I do think we're going to see in 2022 is we're going to see companies starting to really upskill their cyber employees. So if someone's in a coding position and they want to move into cybersecurity, we'll have quick training programs to help upskill those people. But what we're going to see also is we're going to see more programs such as hiring veterans and training them in cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is not just coding. It's marketing, it's sales, it's management, it's cybersecurity, it's forensics. There's so many different avenues that you can go into. And in October of 2021, new job unemployment rates in the U.S. were 291,000. There's a lot of people that have actually come to me, and I help them from other industries. And they say, I want to do cybersecurity. How can I get into this job? So we have these untapped resources of people that are willing, they want to learn it, and they want to do cybersecurity because there's jobs there. So I think that we're going to start seeing veterans tapped for these types of jobs. And I also think people who are maybe mid-career or maybe even at a later stage in their career that want to change into cybersecurity, will see those possibilities open up for them more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I think, cybersecurity, to a certain extent, it's accessibility, and I'll hold my hands up to this and be that, one of the first to fault is cybersecurity can, if we allow it to become this complex world and this, I've heard about this phishing thing or this attack or whatever it might be, but I just don't understand it. And actually, you're absolutely right. There's sales, marketing, copywriting, language skills. There's so many different skill sets that HR, legal. We were talking about legal today and legal representatives who understand security as well. There's so many different skill gaps that we actually have in our industry that are so desired and so sought after. And all of that, I think, I couldn't agree more with you, Karen. I think full employment across cybersecurity would be and can be an amazing future ahead. The resource that we need and desire.
Yep.
Well, Karen, James, thank you so much. This was such a great episode. I feel like I could continue talking to you two for like hours, and I may really, really beg for you to come back for another show, because we will be doing a show on the technology behind instituting a vaccine passport.
I'd love to.
Perfect. Well, great. Thank you so much for these predictions. Thank you for being guests on My Connected Health. My Connected Life. This is Tyler Cohen Wood. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in this week to My Connected Life. We have much more for you next Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific on the Voice America Variety Channel. Until our next show, be careful with your data and your life.